economics and policy know. Stephen Moore and Dr. Art Laffer, they're going to come up and talk about some of the analysis they've done that has cataloged the economic performance of some various states. I'll just hit on some big things. Oh, and also thanks to Good Greek Moving for having us here. They've done a pretty good business in Florida recently. And they did remind me that they are the official movers of both Florida and Florida State football teams when they go and they have equipment and everything like that. And so that's pretty cool. And although we have Miami in the playoff, and then the coach of Tulane is going to end up going to Florida when they're done in the playoff. So there's a lot of moving parts going on in Florida right now, and it's an exciting time. We just did our budget this morning for the next fiscal year. And I was asked, like, hey, what's the difference between first and last? What's it? Because, this is my 8th budget I've done. And it's always great when you're talking about budget to be able to do it from a position of strength. We're not like some states where we're scrambling to fill massive deficits or trying to figure out how to match these unfunded liabilities, or even having conversations like some states do about raising people's taxes. That's like totally not even a discussion in the state of Florida. We were able to roll out the budget today. Our rainy day fund, when I became governor, I think was about $1.3 billion. We've now maxed it out, so it's $5 billion in the rainy day fund. And we're not allowed to put any more money into it the way Florida's constitution is, so that's there. The total reserves in excess of what we're spending when I became governor was about $7 billion. Now we're in this budget about $17 billion, but that's even not counting all the revenue we're going to get until June 30th. Like just November, I was talking to our revenue director, and he's like, yeah, because you hear different things about the economy nationally, about this and that and everything. But he's like, yeah, because then they always forecast how much revenue we're going to get in, and that's how you build the budgets. And it's like, yeah, $250 million over estimate again. And so that's $250 million that they weren't even forecasting that came in just in the month of November in Florida. So even if we do a little less than that overage going forward, that's another $1 billion that's going to go on to that. And we've never had, I think since I've been governor, the reserves we've had, those are the biggest reserves we've ever had. It's gone up and then it went really up and down a little bit. It's still very strong, but we had some years where we were like $22 billion in reserve. Part of it we did tax cuts, part of it we did moving Florida forward with the infrastructure infusion. Some of it we've done for other things that people have wanted to do. But from a fiscal perspective, we've got strong reserves. We've got a maxed out rainy day fund. We also did a project that I worked with the legislature on a couple years ago to do accelerated repayment of some of the state's outstanding debt. So we got guys that handle this. They'll go in, they go on the open market, buy at a discount, some of these bonds, retire them, and then guess what? We don't have to pay interest on that. So we've been able to do that, saving hundreds of millions of dollars in interest costs that we're not having to pay. And if you look at Florida's debt for the history of the state, you go back 180 years until the present, just since I've been governor, we've retired over half of that from that 180-year period just in my tenure as governor. And after this next budget, assuming we get similar support for the program, we will probably end up hitting like 56% of the debt for the entire history of Florida has been retired under our watch. And again, that means you have really strong fiscal posture, fiscal strength. We've also been able to do things like environmental restoration, massive support for the Everglades, for our waterways, for springs, for our coastline. I proposed when my first week as governor, really ambitious. And everyone was like, well, you're not going to be able to do it. We did way more than what we promised. Not even close. Really historic run. And we're now actually doing some of the federal projects. We got a great agreement with the Trump administration where we're able to do the federal share of some of the Everglades. They send us the money. We get it done quicker. So that's been a great story. And that's massive, massive investment for that. Education, we have universal school choice. Every parent gets money. They can take it where they want to go. We also just put in for teacher salaries, because people will talk about teachers needing to be paid more, but yet what typically would happen is you'd send money to school districts, and what happens to the money? It almost goes anywhere but the teacher pockets. And actually, you've had school unions fighting pay increases, like in Lee County. Lee County wanted incentive pay to pay more, and the union down there was suing to stop the incentive pay. So that's just what we found. So we said, okay, it does no good to just send money and hope. If you want to increase salaries, do it. So we created a special item in the budget. It can only be used for teacher pay. So we started off with $500 million, which was a big deal. Now this budget I'm doing now, we're doing $1.58 billion in the budget that can only be used for teacher pay, and that's of course in addition to whatever they do locally. Transportation. We have an issue of, and I think these guys are going to talk about migration. We have net in migration. Some states have net out migration, like California. There was a time where you couldn't get a U-Haul in California because so many people were driving them out of the state because they were leaving at such a fast clip. We've seen it in other parts where that's the case. Here, there's been net in migration, and that's not even from any, I'm not recruiting people. It's like people vote with their feet. It's a free country, and they do that. So we have infrastructure that we've got to do. So we have some of these projects that weren't scheduled to take place for 15 years. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what good is that going to do to wait in traffic for 15 years? So we did Moving Florida Forward, which is about a $7 billion infusion. So everything else we do, we're still doing in strong numbers on our transportation, but this is all those other projects get moved up. So now these things are being done now. They're going to end up being done 5 or 10 years ahead of schedule, maybe even 15 years, depending on it. And you go to a place like I-4 in Orlando, some of these other areas that really need help now, and you're already seeing some of the benefits by getting some of these projects done. So we did that, so that's a really big deal. And so with paying down debt, rainy day fund, also doing big things, what's the total outlook? Our budget in Florida with 23 plus million people is less than the budget of New York City alone. And they have 8 million people. And that's not even counting him nationalizing the grocery stores there, which is going to cost a lot more, I guarantee you that. So and who knows what else they're going to do. So, and then New York State, that's the closest state to us in population. Texas, I think, is 29 million. We're 23 something. New York's 19 something. So we have millions more people than New York now, and yet their budget is over twice the size of the budget of the state of Florida. The budget that we are currently in spends less than the budget the year before, and that budget spends less than the year before that. Budget I propose is basically, same levels of spending, $117 billion that we've been doing basically for all this. So we're doing all this stuff, but yet we're doing it within a budget that is basically, not increasing. And if you go back from the time I was governor, it has increased since then, but population growth, inflation adjusted, if you do that, per capita, we're probably pretty consistent across those times. So that's been really good. Now, taxes is interesting because we don't have an income tax, which is obviously one of the draws for Florida, and we're not going to have one. We do have sales tax. But, the interesting thing is if you are somebody that is not earning a lot of income, you have to consume most of your income to support yourself or your family, the staples of life are largely exempt from Florida's sales tax. Your groceries, your medication. We made it so baby items are now exempt, diapers, wipes, all that stuff. So on day to day, a lot of the key things are not even taxed. And the tourists come, like obviously they're going to get taxed on stuff, some of the other. But on that's good. We didn't really have a lot, and then we just did a Second Amendment sales tax holiday. So no tax on ammunition, on accoutrements, firearms, but also fishing, camping, all this stuff outdoors. So it's been great. People are doing a lot. We made permanent our back-to-school sales tax exemption. We made permanent the disaster preparedness exemption. So we're running out. Like what are you supposed to do? So we had one thing that Florida was an anomaly on. We had a tax on business rent. So if you're a business, and you're leasing something, there's a tax associated with that. Only state in the country to do that. It was not an economically efficient tax, and so we abolished it. And it did raise some revenue, but we're still doing well. And but my revenue director told me, because we abolished that tax in December, 130,000 businesses who would have previously had to file for that now no longer have to file at all. And so you talk about reducing bureaucracy in addition to tax burden. That's a massive windfall for people's time and not having to keep the paperwork and all that stuff. So that's great that we abolished that tax. So now I think the challenge is where can we be the most helpful to provide relief for people, particularly for families? And I can tell you, people aren't saying stuff about sales tax, they're talking about property tax. That's what homeowners are feeling. Why? Because as property values increase, even if they don't raise the millage, all of a sudden you're assessed higher and you owe more. 2019, the total amount, and we don't do property tax revenue at the state level. We don't set property tax. We don't have authority to do that. We don't get the revenue. It's a local function. So 2019, the total amount of property tax revenue that went to local governments was $32 billion in the state of Florida. Today, that number is $56 billion. And, some of them may have raised millage over that time, but I think a lot of it is the assessments, the valuations that have gone up. When the value goes down, they're not as aggressive at doing that. Very aggressive when it goes up. And so, we're looking at that and say, man, first of all, that's not sustainable. You can't almost double the revenue every 6 or 7 years and think that that's going to go. So they got a lot of revenue pouring in because there was a population boom, real estate, all this other stuff, and largely spent it rather than doing reductions in tax. And so I think a lot of people are feeling that, particularly younger families, because if they buy a home at these higher prices, their tax basis is a lot higher than someone that's owned their home for 20 years. So we believe that home ownership should mean you own it. We're working very hard on a great proposal that is going to focus on Florida residents and their primary homesteaded property. And I think it's something that can be very, very meaningful to people and really put our state on a great trajectory. But we're working through all that. But just know that in our budget, I actually provided funding for some of these more fiscally strapped states so that if we totally scrapped it, you'd still be able to backfill them and they could do whatever, because there may be a time for some of them to have to transition. But we're in a position to be able to do that, partially because we've had such strong economy. We've been ranked number 1 3 years in a row by CNBC and U.S. News and World Report. The one thing that we can control that can be the most significant, though, to give people some breathing room is the property tax relief. And so we're working hard. It's got to go on the ballot. It needs to pass by the voters since it's a constitutional local issue. But we want you to have your own personal homestead be your own personal homestead. And so that's the vision. We're working through the details, and we need to get support from people, in the legislature on this. So stay tuned. There's going to be more news on that. And the final thing is, before I bring up Steve and Art, is yes, all the things I sketched out on budget, fiscal, small government, regulatory environment, education. Oh, I didn't even mention the higher education. We're number 1 in that, like 10 years in a row. And University of Florida just got ranked number 1 in the nation, including private, by the Manhattan Institute, because they did criteria about free speech, not having indoctrination, basically like what a university should do. And they did very high. Some of the prestige universities didn't do as high because, honestly, a lot of them are riding prestige and have kind of dropped the ball on other things. But we have not raised in-state tuition since I've been governor of the state. So it's $6,300 for Florida residents, for kids of Florida residents. That's the lowest in the country by far, and we're going to keep it that way. And you get these, we have our Bright Futures program. You don't even need to pay tuition if you qualify for that, or just a fraction of the tuition depending on where you are. So on higher education, that's been a great story. We've been able to do that, and we've been able to do things like now all tenured professors have to undergo review every 5 years and can be terminated for poor performance. So they've been able to filter out unproductive tenured faculty. And our view is your job is to teach, job is to research. Your job is not to, be an activist. If you want to do that, you can go to Berkeley, you can go to all these other places. We want to underwrite serious scholarship and make sure that we're doing subjects that matter. So we've done that, but then we've also created a pot of money for university presidents to recruit directly, and they can hire people with tenure with the board of trustees. We're not letting the faculty blackball people for ideological reasons anymore. So this has been a major change just in the last couple years, and I think people start to see this a little bit more as the years go on. But I was at University of Florida the other day. We have something called the Hamilton School for Citizenship and Civics Education, Classical Learning, something along, but basically the buzzwords that are telling you know what, we embrace Western civilization, we embrace the classics, we embrace merit, we embrace high standards, the things that really, I think, used to mark all of our top universities however long ago. But I'm like meeting these faculty. We got the best Civil War scholar from Princeton to go to University of Florida. We got a guy from Harvard for 40 years, just finished his and he's coming to University of Florida. He said he needed a sane environment, and we're comparatively very sane, right? I mean, and so you have that. But then I'm like meeting these people, and like some of them, are very young. It's like they're almost like kids, like in their 30s. But like this is where they're going to build their careers. And they came from Chicago, University of Chicago, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, you name it, coming there, and that's all because we put this in place to be able to do. So that's something that's really, really meaningful and really, really significant. So the final thing before I introduce them, though, is all that's great. It's great to have good policy. It's great to do that. But what really separated us, and I know their statistics, they're going to get the more recent, the last couple years, hopefully soon. But really, the COVID pandemic created a huge discrepancy in how states were governing, right? Because you had the California, New York, Illinois model, very repressive. It's interesting, you'd have the Illinois governor send his family to Palm Beach and they would do whatever, and the governor of California would go to the French Laundry. I mean, so it was definitely, wasn't even Steven in terms of how they applied it, but it was not done, I think, and it hurt those states. And I think we were the refuge of sanity. And so part of like the real flood of adjusted gross income in businesses and people buying homes was as a result of that really strong contrast that we drew with almost every other state, particularly in the summer of 2020 towards the end. See, once we got to like 2022, everyone always pretended that they were for what we were doing the whole time. I can tell you none of them were for what we were doing. We just said kids had a right to be in school, and you had the teacher unions that were, bringing coffins to our Department of Education building because they said all the kids were going to die and all this stuff. So that's just what we were dealing with. It was mass hysteria, very hostile narrative, and not. But we stood our ground on that. And basically, people just responded, not only in Florida, but across the country. So that was a unique situation. You did it because you were trying to respect people's decision-making, their livelihoods, their freedoms. It wasn't like you were doing it because you're calculating an increase in GDP or any of that. But the reality is it just did supercharge a lot of what was going on economically. And that's kind of a once-in-a-century thing that you have. And I think our state obviously benefited from our approach in terms of the economy. I think like since COVID, we've had more adjusted gross income move into Florida than has ever moved into another state in the history of the United States of America, even adjusting for inflation. But had we done the opposite, I think we would have done way worse than even some of those other states that did it. This state's not built to be governed that way, and I think things would have gotten really bad. So, I'm proud that we were kind of carrying the torch. It was very lonely there for a while. Then more and more people kind of caught on board, and so. But I think the results speak for themselves. So I'm just glad that we have Steve and Art, who were they got a great organization that does a lot of great analysis. They looked at voting with their feet and how people in a free country are able to pick up and move. And not that it was a political analysis, because I think it's just economic, but I will tell you, when you started to see more and more New York plates come down here, a lot of my supporters were worried, because it was a very competitive state, and if you dump 100,000 people, what is that going to do to the political? And then when the California license plates started showing up, that freaked people out, because no one had ever seen California license plates before. But it turns out that of all 49 other states, and again, the economics speak for themselves, it's not about red, blue, but the reality is all 49 other states, if you look at each one individually and look at who's moved to Florida since I've been governor, it's been more Republicans than Democrats. That's true in Vermont to Florida, California to Florida, Georgia to Florida, Michigan to Florida, you name it. It's just been undeniable. So we appreciate that. We appreciate everything. So who's going to, Art or Steve, who's going to go first? So we'll have you guys come up however you want to do it, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Governor. I work as the CEO of a group called Unleash Prosperity. There's 4 of us who are the founders of that organization, myself and Arthur Laffer, who you're just going to hear from in a few minutes, and the great Steve Forbes and the great Larry Kudlow. And the whole idea was to promote pro-economic growth policies. And by the way, I'm sold, Governor, I'm moving to Florida after listening to you talk. Amazing performance. So what we did, the reason we're here, and one of the first people I called when we came out with the results of this study was Governor DeSantis. We started a project called Vote With Your Feet. And it basically is tracking where people are moving to, where they're moving from. We have the Census Bureau data, which is the movement of people, and then, Governor, we have IRS data that shows we don't know who they are, but we know how much income they have by looking at the IRS returns. So to just get cut right down to the chase, we found 2 things that were pretty amazing. One is that Florida has gained roughly the most people on net of any other state over the last 10 years. It's close between Texas and Florida in terms of number of people, but both of those states have something very similar in common, that they are both states without an income tax. And you'll hear from Arthur brag about Tennessee, because Tennessee is also no income tax state. So those numbers are pretty incredible. But what I really want to just spend a couple minutes focusing on is what really made these numbers you're talking about in your budget possible. The fact that you have so much revenue coming in and such a nice budget surplus, and boy, most states would love to be in that position today. What we found, and Tim, if you can show that chart, I think I put it, is this, okay, here it is. So these are the 10 states that have gained the most income cumulatively over the last 10 years. This is through 2022, the most recent data we have from the IRS. And this was the reason I called you, Governor, is look at Florida. Florida has gained $1 trillion of cumulative income over the last 10 years. That is the biggest transfer of wealth into a state in the history of the United States. Nothing else even comes close. Now, Texas, by the way, which has gained the same amount of people, they've only gained, in terms of income, less than half of Florida. What is that telling you? It's the business owners are coming with their businesses, and they're creating jobs here in the state of Florida. So it's a great, great story. Incidentally, if you look at the states that are losing the most population and losing the most amount of money, adjusted gross income, to other states. New York, yeah, do we have that one? I'll just show it to you very quickly. You can see here, Governor, that New York is the big loser. And by the way, I love these boxes, to Florida from New York City, perfect. So New York is basically bleeding money because of their high tax, high regulation policies. But people would say, whenever I show this to people, Governor, they say, oh, well, that's obvious. People would move from New York to California, from New York to Florida, because you have the beautiful weather. I mean, we're loving this. When I left Washington, D.C. yesterday, it was 32 degrees, and it's beautiful here. But that may explain a bit why people are moving from New York. But look at California. California may even have nicer weather than Florida. And California is bleeding revenues as well. So that last thing I will say about this is that just two other quick points. One is, it's not just Florida. I mean, it's not just Texas. The southern states around the country are doing amazing. Even states that, other states used to laugh at, like Arkansas and West Virginia and Alabama and Mississippi, are gaining population from these high-tax states. And that's a story that a lot of people aren't paying attention to. One of my favorite statistics, I'm sure you're probably aware of this, but for the first time in the 250-year history of this country, for the first time ever, the Northeast is no longer the dominant economic region. I don't know if you're aware of that. It just happened last year for the first time. That more GDP, for the first 250 years of our country, it was the Northeast, right? It was Boston, it was New York as the financial center, it was Baltimore, it was Philadelphia, even bleeding into Washington, D.C. No longer. Now the Southeast is what is creating more GDP than any other region. And so the South has become a real dominant region, and Florida has led the way. So congratulations for what you've done, Governor. It is an amazing story. I know Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, very well. There's been a healthy competition between Texas and Florida to see which would be number one. Right now, number one is Florida. So congratulations. Okay.
Talking about this, you just have a little story to tell you. I flew into Miami Airport, and there were all these people around there, and there was two people sort of talking loudly over in the corner, and I'm a nosy person. So I went over and listened to them carefully, and there's two guys. The one guy said to the other one, "Did you hear about the Florida family? They got all their relatives, their cousins, their aunts, their uncles. The whole family got together, packed all their bags, and they moved to Illinois. Did you hear about that story?" And the second one said, "Well, no, I didn't." And the other one looked at him and said, "And you never will." Let me just tell you, Governor, it's such an honor to be with you. And what you've done in Congress, in the U.S. Congress, you were absolutely magnificent. Coming here to Florida, I don't know if all of these people understand the pressure you were under the COVID thing to do what you did. I mean, that strength. Now, I think it's our common Yale background that no, just joking, but it's just amazing. Steve, I've been working with you forever, and it's just phenomenal. What I want to do is just do one simple thing with you, and I hope I'm not going way over your heads. If you've got two locations, A and B, if you raise taxes in B and you lower them in A, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from to, am I going way over your heads on this one? I mean, if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, do I need to say the next line to you there? I mean, when you look at this world, incentives drives the whole package, all of it. And just for the facts, I mean, and what Steve does is beautiful, correct, these are facts. And when you look at someone and you ask them, what's your opinion? And my answer always is, I could give a damn what your opinion is. And you should give a damn what my opinion is. This is about facts, not how you feel. And that's what's going on here. It really is about facts. If you look at it, there have been 11 states in the U.S. that have introduced an income tax since 1960. 11 states. First one was West Virginia in 1961. The last one was Connecticut. Lowell Weicker, fellow Yaley, unfortunately, did it in 1991, did it there. There were 9 states in the middle there. That's Maine, that's Rhode Island, that's Pennsylvania, that's Ohio, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Michigan, even Nebraska did an income tax. I probably missed a couple in there, but they all introduced. What I did back in the olden days is I took each of those 11 states and I lined them up based upon the year they introduced the income tax. You with me on that? So now they all did it at different years, but they all did it there. Ohio was another one, by the way, my home state. All lined them up in that. And I looked at the 5 years before they introduced the income tax and looked at the most recent 5 years for these states in all of the major economic metrics. Population, what Steve's talked about, adjusted gross income, gross state product, tax revenues. If you were a fly on the wall of those 11 states, why did these guys want to introduce an income tax? Well, we want public services. And of course, they want roads, we want police, we want school, we want all that stuff. 50 to 55% of all the spending in states, every state, is on education. So what I did, I lined up all those 11 states. I looked at the major metrics for all the states, and I compared them to the 39 states that did not change their tax status. You with me? All right, the 5 years before they did it, and then the most recent 5. Every single one of those states, every single one of them, dropped relative to the rest of the nation. I mean, dropped dramatically. Some of them by a lot. I mean, in 1950, Detroit had a population of 1.8 million. Today, it's below 600,000. My home state of Ohio, same thing. These states just collapsed in every single, including tax revenues. These guys did not get the tax revenues either. I mean, if you look at it, New Jersey, in 1965, New Jersey had neither an income tax nor a sales tax, neither one. It was the fastest growing state in the nation. Everyone from everywhere was moving into New Jersey, and they had a balanced budget. When my student, a guy named John Corzine, was governor of New Jersey, he was my student at the University of Chicago, and honestly, just to be fully transparent, a C student. And after the stories of MF Global, I'm not even sure he earned the C, if you know what I mean. They were the highest property taxes, highest sales taxes, highest income taxes, highest corporate tax. They are still way highest corporate tax. All these tax. It's now the sinkingest fate in the slowest growing state in the nation, losing people like droves, and they have big deficits in their budgets. You know, this stuff is all economics. If you look at the 9 states, and by the way, if you look at the results on education for these 11 states, everyone except 2 states actually dropped in their provision of educational services to their students. Their test scores went down relative to the rest of the nation. They didn't even get the products that they were looking for in this stuff. If you look at the 9 states with no income tax and compare them with the 9 states that have the high, the 9 states with no income tax beats the living bejabbers out of the 9 states with the highest income tax, year in, year out. It's just a massive thing there. You know, when you look at this stuff, Steve, what you've done, you've taken all this stuff, it's been great. I'm especially impressed, Governor, by your willingness to focus on property taxes. I was very involved in Prop 13 in California, which we limited property tax rate growth to 2% per year. Never can exceed that, and never can exceed more than 1% effective tax rate. You know, if I can help you in any way, shape, or form, I was really up to my ears in that one. You know, I have never been prouder to be a guest in a state of Florida here. Governor, you're the most magnificent thing that's happened to Florida or any state in ages. Thank you very much for all you do, and I hope the rest of the nation follows you so you no longer are alone in your success. We're all successful together. Thanks.
So great presentations. I thank these guys for doing this, but it really kind of goes back to you know, Art is famous for doing the Laffer curve. Do you guys know what that is? I think some people do. But basically, you know, he was an advisor to Governor Reagan and then President Reagan. And you know, we had a situation where you had marginal tax rates that reached at one point in this country 90% and then were 70%. And Art made the observation that, well, you know, you can't just say, here's what people are earning, you raise the rate and you're just going to get more, because people change their behavior. Why would you want to work? Even if you're going to be paid $1 million, why would you want to work for a 90% marginal rate? You're getting 10 cents on the dollar. And so he predicted and observed that you would see a decline in revenue if you tried to raise those marginal rates. And then actually, if you reduce the marginal rates where you were creating better incentives, that you could get more revenue. And you actually had big revenue boom in the 80s, you know, after President Reagan's, you know, tax cuts. But what you're seeing there, I mean, the results speak for themselves in terms of the policies. All those states have done similar policies, right? You know, New York, you pay city tax if you're in the city, you state income tax, all this other stuff. California is interesting because they have the highest income tax in America. And, you know, when I bring that up, sometimes people will say, well, you know, you guys have sales tax. They also have the highest sales tax in America. It's like 9% sales tax. Are you kidding me? And the income tax hits you even if you're, you know, working class. It isn't like it's only for Silicon Valley. And, you know, people are leaving. And, you know, Steve said, you know, they might have better weather than Florida. Look, Southern California is the best weather in the United States. I don't even think it's even close. Like, I was a young naval officer. I got sent to Coronado, the Naval Amphibious Base, and I check into the BOQ, and I'm born and raised in Florida, and had been stationed in Mayport in Northeast Florida. And I go into the thing, and like a good Floridian, I'm looking for the air conditioning thing. They don't have air conditioning. They're like, just open the window. So I open the window, it's nice and fresh, but I notice there's no screen. You know, Florida, we got bugs, no screen. There's no bugs here, don't worry about it. I'm like, what, you can do that? And it was like so nice, so refreshing. And I thought to myself then, I was, 20 some years old, I was like, and I didn't like taxes then either, but I was like, I don't know that I'd ever pay, but I understand why people would pay the taxes because it's so nice. And in I'd say the 20th century, California was the engine of the American dream. I mean, people aspired to go to California. I mean, it just had so much stuff going for it. And the fact that they're losing people and losing on the economy like that and they have a lot of built-in advantages because the tech was there. Wasn't there because of their current government. It's been there for decades, right? You have entertainment, you have certain things that have been built up over many generations, and if they didn't have all that, then all the results of policies would be even more dramatic. But this is what's doing. And then they were talking about some of the income tax. You look in like the industrial Midwest, and I've talked to some of these guys about it because I know some of the legislative leaders and some of these. I work with them on stuff. We're working on a balanced budget amendment certified for the states on Congress, and we're working on term limits certified for the states on Congress. So I've gone to talk, like Ohio, I went and talked to them, I think about term limits. And I was like, everyone around you has income tax. I was like, if you just get rid of yours, it will pay for itself. You will have massive movement of people and capital and money to where you'll be able to raise revenue with your existing taxes or doing consumption stuff. So whoever the first mover would be in that region, they will benefit. Because, if you're already in Illinois, going to Ohio is not as big, or Indiana going over, or vice versa, to go from Ohio to Indiana. If Indiana did it, I think someone could do very well if they did it. But they get this static analysis to think, if you get rid of the tax, then you have not understanding there's going to be a lot of changes that will happen for that. So that all goes back to just understanding when we're doing policies, it's not static. People do change their behavior. And if you provide bad incentives, you're going to get bad results. And so obviously, when we don't have any income tax in Florida, that's the best incentive, and people have done it, and we're going to just keep doing it. So I thank everybody for being here, and I got time for some questions. Yes, sir. The question is, will Republicans be able to maintain control of the U.S. House in the midterms? One, my answer is I don't know. There's people that do that for a living. I will just say, as someone that studies history, when the party's out of power, they typically turn out better, and the party in power's voters tend to get more complacent. That's why we have these midterm effects. You remember Obama swept in 2008. Everyone said Democrats are never going to lose. And then what happened 2 years later? You had a massive shift to Republicans. Donald Trump stormed in 2016. Then they had a blue wave in 2018. And so there's just a yin and a yang with some of this stuff. But Republicans are going to have to contend with that. I've run in good environments, I was running for Congress in 2014. The Democrat Party didn't have a pulse, right? I ran for governor in 2018, was not a good environment. It was the wind was in your face, right? And you really got to go. And so I don't think that you should assume you're going to have the wind at your back, and just assume that these typical midterms, that's going to be a lot of the dynamic. So to me, it's like the most important thing you got to do is deliver for the voters that sent you there. You got to have your base of support that feels like they need to go to the polls and vote to send you back to the Congress or to the U.S. Senate. You have to do that. If you don't have that base of support, then you're not going to be able to get enough support, even if you do well with independents. So when you deliver for people, I do think that they respond. In 22 here in Florida, we obviously had a big election. My election was the biggest for a Republican running for governor in the history of the state. But part of it was people felt, but it wasn't a great year for Republicans overall. Republicans underperformed nationally. But I think here was like, yeah, you're delivering results. We're going to go out there. We're excited to go out there and vote. And I think that's so these congressmen and senators, are they going to get to where the people that put them there are thankful that they're there and realize how important it is, because I think the other side is going to be energized. I think that's just the natural yin and yang of these midterms. Right. First of all, Blaze, our CFO, is doing a great job. Very strong, big time bulldog, and he's been great on all these issues as a senator over the years. Election integrity, fighting illegal immigration, just top notch. So what he's doing in this round is not even itemizing, oh, look at this turkey, look at that. What he's doing is saying, okay, you're getting us, because it goes back to 32 billion taken in 2019, now 56 billion now, right? What he's doing is he's saying, okay, where were you and where are you now? Yes, we're going to give you increase for population growth. We're going to give you increase for inflation. We're going to give you increase to pay your employees more on top of all that. So he's doing very conservative estimates that if spending goes up with all those factors, and sometimes that's considerable, but then it goes up over and above that, that's the level that becomes unreasonable. And so that's the first pass to show where we're looking at the whole thing. He's now going to go in and start to do some individual items. Like, for example, it's like, if you're spending, $1 million on DEI, I think people would rather have a property tax cut. I really do, right? If you're doing some of this other stuff. So he's going to do that. We're also, you're looking at the counties. He's going to look at other major agencies that are in local government and do that. I mean, for example, you've already seen like Broward, like the Broward School District, right? Massive bureaucracy, massive amount of money going to some of this stuff, not necessarily getting into the classroom, right? So all that's going to happen, but the initial one where he's showing the amount over, that's saying, okay, what were you spending before? What are you spending now? Yeah, you got to increase for all these things, and he's very conservative. And I think most people in this room would say, no, you didn't need to increase all that. But he's saying that's fine. He's saying you do all that, and you're still spending hundreds of millions on top of that. What that does is I think it gives taxpayers the assurance that if you have an opportunity to vote on property tax, they're going to, they can tax the Airbnbs and all that stuff still. But like, your personal residence, honestly, they're spending a lot of money. And the budgets have grown. And the question is, would you rather have escalating budgets or would you rather have taxpayer protection? I think most people would rather have taxpayer protection. Yes, ma'am. So the question is about treating the narco terrorists as military targets rather than treating it as a law enforcement. And I think that the U.S. has a right to treat it and engage it as a military threat simply because we've seen over the last 10, 20 years the amount of people that have been killed by cartels bringing drugs in to our country. So it's not just like somebody's coming in and committing like a foot fault, right? I mean, this is really serious where people's lives are at stake, and the cartels have been able to move this product in with impunity for a long time. Now they have a different calculation. How each individual operates, I know the media is talking about this or that. I don't know. I haven't been briefed. I haven't seen that. But I do think the threshold question of, is it appropriate to say that somebody trying to enter your country with drugs that obviously can be deadly for people, do you have a right as Commander-in-Chief to repel that incursion into your country? And the answer to that is yes. Yes. I have no idea. I mean, you guys, the people down there would know a little bit more than me. I wasn't involved in the runoff. I did an endorsement in the original scrum, and then once it advanced to the runoff, it just wasn't something I was involved in. So I don't know what the issues were or any of that. But look, I would say this. it kind of is this same effect where you have one side is energized to come out, and that's going to be something that's likely to continue through the midterms and potentially even beyond from the midterms. Yes? Well, so first of all, I think what the phenomenon you point out is a nationwide phenomenon. If you look right now and you compare the median home price in the United States to median income, it is very out of whack. I mean, just you can't look at 430 and 80,000, and how does that work if a family wants to buy and maintain a residence? And that's not even counting the property tax, insurance, all the other things that go into it. I just saw the analysis on automobiles. New automobile median is now $50,000. I remember when I was, I think probably like a college or law. I bought a pickup truck. I mean, I don't remember exactly, but I mean, it was like $10,000 to $15,000, right? And so, we have inflation, but the incomes aren't rising as fast as that. So it creates an issue. So what are we doing? One, look. Government has helped fuel some of the issues with these markets in the past, right? We can't say we're going to make home prices less or this or that. It's just not something government does a good job on. I think what happened, partially the phenomenon that they're talking, we had a rush of people here. People were buying houses. You could sell a house, a 3-bedroom in California, and then buy like a 6-bedroom in Sarasota with what? I mean, that was, people were buying homes sight unseen. They were going in, they were doing all this stuff. And so it drove up prices. Now, prices went up everywhere, but Florida, you had kind of this crushing demand. And so that's just, so where we were 5 years ago compared to now these things correct, right? These markets work themselves out. You can't, unless you start having a massive increase in income, the idea that those prices are going to be able to stay, and that's what you're seeing now, I think, is homes aren't selling like they were during the COVID surge. I also think sellers are delisting homes because they're not getting offers or not the one. So what I think is going to happen is, as interest rates come down, hopefully they do, mortgage rates, there'll be more buyers in the market, but they're not going to be paying COVID-era prices. And so you're going to have a correction there in the market. Now, rents, we are seeing decline in rent in most parts of Florida. Now, look, Miami's a little bit different. I know West Palm's a little bit different markets. I still think you're seeing some relief there. But you're seeing 10, 15, 20% declines in like Fort Myers and some of these areas. And part of that is because there has been building of Florida. There's been expansion of inventory, which I think has taken pressure off some of the rents. So the rents in most parts of Florida today are less than they were probably 2 years ago. And I think that trend's probably going to continue. Now, property tax I mentioned, I think that's a great way to provide people relief. Other costs that have gone up, and this is true nationwide. The number one thing, if you look item by item, that's gone up in the last 4 or 5 years has been auto insurance. Well, we did a big restructuring of our legal system that is impacting those markets in a positive way. Progressive just announced they're going to refund $1 billion to policyholders in Florida. State Farm just announced a 10% reduction. I think all the major auto carriers are going to be offering reductions. Now, some people will tell me, hey, I got mine, I didn't see a reduction. I was like, did you search for other companies? No. I was like, well, you got to search for, if you're willing to pay it, they're going to keep charging it. They don't lower prices out of the goodness of their heart. They lower prices because there's other companies that are competing for your business. And so if someone's offering you more competitive rates, you go there, that's obviously going to create a downward pressure. So more and more people are into the market because we changed the tort system instead of trying to benefit lawyers, which it had done, to be more consumer focused. So the auto is likely to continue. And then homeowners as well. Peninsula is the number one carrier in Florida. They announced an 8% reduction, I think, last month. We were just at the reinsurance conference. They're sending capital now to Florida. They're confident because of the way the market has changed. There's more predictability. So you're going to see these rate filings come in over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months that I think are going to be positive for homeowners. And I've already talked to people that have been able to save. And again, that's just the fact that we've 16 companies have come into the market. They're trying to get new business, and we're doing that. Citizens insurance, which I know is big in Southern Florida. We went from, it ballooned to 1.2 million or 1.3 million. Now it's down to about 400,000, and it may go down to 300,000. So they were collecting all the premiums there and didn't probably have enough to make the pro. But now that they have fewer policies, they actually are going to be in a position where I think you may be able to see some reductions out of Citizens. Nationwide, this is true, not just Florida. The insurance and the taxes are combined more than the principal and interest on a lot of mortgages right now. And that's really tough, because it used to be principal and interest was the big thing. Pay a little tax, pay a little insurance every month, but like that was it was modest. Now that's gone. So our markets have definitely turned in a positive direction. Not having a hurricane has been a huge help. We had 6 major hurricanes in 7 years. That is not good for that market. And then we had a really significant period nationwide of inflation, so that replacing homes was probably 50% to 100% more expensive than it had been just 4 or 5 years ago. And so hopefully that will moderate, and we're in a situation there. But not having the storm this year is big. People are now having confidence. There was a time when the companies did not want to be in this state for this because, there's risks, right? There's perils. But now they say there's predictability. They know they're going to suffer. There's losses that they can articulate and predict. Whereas when you have all the litigation, it used to be you could sue for 3 years. And so they would think that they had done something, and then they're like, I don't want to be a part of Florida. And so that's why a lot of people were going. And again, it's me about creating good conditions so that incentives can take over. So now you have all these companies that have come in. They want your business. You shop around and find the best deal that you can. So there's all those factors that are happening, but I do think we're not going to be able to force prices there. That's not the role of government, but I do think the market, when it goes up a lot, there is a correction. And I do think that that's going to happen. And look, it's like when it goes up, if you're the owner, you have more value, at least on paper, right? So people like that. If you're trying to get into the market, it's harder. When it corrects, not as good for the person that has the property, but then the people trying to get in, all of a sudden, where it would have been 2 years ago, now maybe it's something that you can afford. So there's a lot of factors to go on that. We have done, final thing I'll just say is, we have helped with getting more inventory in the rental market, and you are seeing that, I think. But we've also helped some of the police and fire and teachers and nurses with our Hometown Heroes, which just helps them with closing costs and down payment. They wanted to expand it to everybody. I say once you expand it to everyone, then everyone else is just going to pocket that. If it's only for a discrete group, then they can maybe do it. So we did do that. It's been popular. I think people have enjoyed it. Yes, ma'am. I have not seen it. I do know, just having traveled this state extensively, you get some nasty situations with these HOAs. I get it. On the one hand, if you didn't have anything, then you have one bad neighbor that doesn't cut their lawn, and it's an eyesore. But on the other hand, it's like, man, you put a flag in your front yard, all of a sudden you're getting fined or something like that. So who knows? I mean, I'm happy to look at whatever the legislature does, in that regard. But I haven't seen any specific pieces of legislation. Yes. Well, I think what happened was when we first opened it, they said they had enough people with deportation orders that it would likely be that. Then people are like, oh, so you're saying none of them do it. And then basically I think what I said was, no, we're not saying none of them do. We're saying that that's what it predominantly is. But, that was 3 or 4 months ago. And so now we're in a different situation. So I don't know the answer to that. The state doesn't select who goes there. That's selected there by DHS. The state is, basically serving to utilize space to be able to go until they can get more space for themselves. They have very little space in Florida, even though we're the 3rd largest state. So we have the one in North Florida, in Baker County, We're working on one in the Panhandle. We're working on another one south of I-4 that will hopefully be what needs to be done. But my goal would be, if they have enough space to be able to handle this, we don't need to be in that business, right? We're doing it to help them because we don't want these people released on the street if they're supposed to be earmarked for deportation. And we're now closing in on Florida Highway Patrol. I think they've gotten close to 10,000 arrests of illegal aliens this year. And if you think about it, that's not their core function. So, you have the feds who are supposed to do this job every day, and then our Highway Patrol is supplementing, and they've done another 10,000 on top of that, and that's because, we want to be in the mission, we believe in the mission. And I always get these questions, or people will say, oh, Florida taxpayers are funding that. First of all, it's reimbursed. I said it at the time it was going to be reimbursed, and they still tried to say, then when they confirmed that it was going to be reimbursed, they just kind of ignored it, the critics, and they just say, oh, no, you're spending. So I don't know how much it's going to cost, over the next 6 months precisely for, say, our North Florida one. I know it's one of our own facilities, so it's probably going to be met, but I also know it's reimbursable, 100%. So from a taxpayer perspective in Florida, you're not out on that. But let me tell you, you're saving. Illegal immigration costs taxpayers. It costs health care. It costs education. It costs law enforcement, unfortunately, sometimes. It costs accidents. How many, they don't have, we don't give driver's license in Florida. They don't have insurance, and so you have all these problems. And so I never hear the media or the critics talk about how much we're saving taxpayers by removing illegal aliens, and especially some of the criminal aliens who are likely to reoffend. But that's been a big deal. And so from what we've done with Highway Patrol, FDLE, our local sheriffs, all of that, you're talking about a large, sizable, but that's on top of what DHS is doing. And that does make a difference. That makes a difference for taxpayers. So we're going to end up out of this having net gain, and a lot of the gain will be to local communities rather than the state, right? These hospitals, the school systems, all those things. But it's hard. I mean, you get crowded, and then it's also just like, how many people coming illegally don't even speak English? So then you inject that into schools, it makes it more difficult. So there's a whole host of problems that I think that stems from that. We're doing kind of what what the people wanted us to do, supplementing the federal government's efforts. And if they had the ability to do it all on their own, then, we would always, if our Highway Patrol finds somebody and they don't have a license, they're illegal, they will turn them over. But like we're active with DHS, and we're happy to do that. Totally happy to do that. Okay, thanks, guys. You guys have a good one. Enjoy the weekend. Oh, it's Wednesday. This is how the brain works. You come to